By 1939, Adolf Hitler had risen to power in Germany and had set out to restore Germany to its former glory before the embarrassment of the Treaty of Versailles that ended World War I. In 1919, Germany had set up a republican government. Many Germans blamed this new government for accepting the conditions of the horrible treaty. The treaty stated that Germany was to accept responsibility for all losses and damages in the conflict in what was termed the War Guilt Clause. Also, the German Army, Navy, and Air Forces were all reduced and restrictions were placed on the manufacturing of war materials. Most people were without jobs, and they soon drifted into either the Communist or National Socialist Party. As the Republican government lost power, Hitler and his Nazi Party gained power. Soon, despite many agreements to maintain peace around the world, Hitler plunged the world back into war with Germany's invasion of Poland in September of 1939. Due to the invasion, Britain and France declared war on Germany. Sides quickly formed. The Big Four of the Allied powers would become Britain, the United States, the Soviet Union, and France. The Axis powers included Germany, Japan, and Italy. The British and French military forces could not stand against the power of the German military, so Hitler was able to continue with his quest to conquer Europe. Norway and Denmark were invaded in April of 1940, followed by Belgium and the Netherlands in May. By July, Germany had begun bombing Britain. The German military and Hitler's conquest seemed unstoppable. His two goals were to conquer all of Europe and North Africa, and then eliminate both communism and the Jewish population from the world. After the war began in 1939, the United States was divided over the issue of joining the war. Two main groups emerged over the conflict. One group, the isolationists, wanted the U.S. to stay out of the war at any cost. The other group, the interventionists, wanted the U.S. to do everything they could to aid the Allies. Most Americans wanted the Allies to win, but hoped the U.S. would stay out of the war. Instead of declaring war on Germany, the U.S. began to expand its armed forces and provide aid to the Allies. In order to help support the Allies, U.S. factories quickly changed from consumer factories to military factories. The U.S. would prepare for war, but the main goal was to stay out of the war. Japan, another main Axis power, had different plans for the United States. Although World War II is said to have started with Germany's invasion of Poland in September of 1939, Japan had begun its conquest on September 18, 1931, when it invaded Manchuria. Japan hoped to conquer Manchuria and then go on to gain control over China. Due to the Great Depression and Japan's population explosion, resources were desperately needed if Japan wanted to remain a first-rate world power. Manchuria was known for its natural resources, which made it a great target for Japanese forces. Up until this point, Japan had been buying cotton, gasoline, scrap iron, and aircraft equipment from the U.S. After the invasion of China, though, many Americans sympathized with the Chinese. This led the U.S. to place an embargo on Japan in 1938, which would stop all trade with the Japanese. Tension between the two countries was increasingly high in the fall of 1941. Japan's form of retaliation would have devastating costs for both the United States and ultimately Japan itself. After it was all said and done, over 3,500 Americans would be lost. 18 ships, including 8 battleships, and over 350 aircraft would be destroyed. This event would go down in history known simply as Pearl Harbor. Although it was a devastating blow to the United States Navy, it would plunge the U.S. into World War II, setting her up to defeat both Japan and Germany and come out of the war as the #1 world power. It is in this war-torn, tense world that we meet young Adam, who has just recently moved to Hawaii. It was 1941. The rest of the world had been at war since Germany invaded Poland on September 1, 1939. The United States had managed to stay out of the war so far, and like many kids my age, war was the last thing on my mind. My name is Adam, and I live near Honolulu in Hawaii. Besides the fact that I was a military kid and moved around all the time, my life was normal. I hated being a military kid. I always had to change schools and meet new people. It was difficult to make friends, and it seemed like when I finally would make friends, we would just move again. We had just moved to Honolulu because my father got stationed at Pearl Harbor. I was really starting to like Hawaii, and I had 2 new friends. My life really was normal. until that horrific day. I had been looking forward to that Sunday for a long time. Sunday, December 7th, 1941. I was finally going to get to go fishing with my friends and get away from my father. My father, a Navy lieutenant, loved me, but he was always scrutinizing me. I always felt like I wasn't good enough. I regret wanting to get away from him now. I'll never forget that morning. We were out in the harbor fishing. I could see all the U.S. battleships stretched out in front of us. How could I possibly know that seconds later, the Empire of Japan would launch a surprise attack on the entire naval fleet stationed at Pearl Harbor? I knew that relations between the United States and the Empire of Japan had been rocky ever since the U.S. placed an embargo prohibiting exports of steel, scrap iron, and aviation fuel to Japan, but I was under the impression that peace talks were being made between the two countries. I never could have imagined the attack that occurred that day. For 2 hours, the Japanese bombed the battleships in the surrounding areas. The attack consisted of 2 waves of absolute horror, in which 18 ships, including all 8 battleships in the Pacific Fleet, and over 350 aircraft were destroyed or damaged. Worst of all was that by the end of the attack, over 3,500 Americans were killed or wounded. At least 1,177 lives were lost on the Arizona alone. The Arizona. That was my father's ship. I couldn't even believe the attack was real until I saw the Arizona lift out of the water. That huge battleship was picked up and split apart like it was nothing, and then I watched as it began to sink beneath the water, where it would forever rest at the bottom of the harbor with all of those men still trapped inside. With my father on that ship, the Arizona was sinking, and where was I? Out fishing with my friends, happy that I wasn't with him. Now I would do anything to find him and make sure he was okay. But how can anyone survive that? Described by President Franklin D. Roosevelt as a day which will live in infamy, Pearl Harbor changed the course of United States history as the U.S. was thrust into war in a matter of hours. Follow along with Adam and A Boy at War by Harry Mazer as he experiences the attack firsthand and is even called to take action as he frantically searches for his father amid the chaos. Will Adam be able to find his father? Find out by reading this exciting story of heroism and bravery in the face of war as you are allowed to experience what the attack on Pearl Harbor would have been like for brave young men like Adam on that fateful day, which shall live in infamy.